Hey there, Dango Stu here. In today's video I'm going to be installing a Raymarine Wi-Fish sonar into the green machine. To do this job I would normally take the boat on a trailer just up to the workshop and do it, but there's already a boat stuck on the trailer at the moment. So I'm just going to drag this up into the shallows, let the tide go out and do it while the boat's on the shore. The riverbed's actually quite rocky here, so I'm just going to drag it in rather than driving it. There are two main things you want to be careful about when you're tying a boat to a wharf and waiting for the tide to go out. One is that you leave enough slack in the ropes so that the boat doesn't end up just hanging from the wharf as the tide goes out. The other is I'm going to throw an anchor out to make sure the boat doesn't go under the wharf as well. Tide's gone out of fairway. My actual plan was to have the transom hanging off that rock ledge there, but that didn't quite pan out obviously. So what I'm going to do is just start going through the instructions and do the wiring first, and then we'll do the install of the transducer itself once the tide's dropped a little bit more. Before we get too far into this install, I should probably explain what the WIFIsh is. It sounds a bit like almost a wife, WIFIsh, you know, like a girlfriend or something, I don't know. But the idea is it's a sonar, but it's a Wi-Fi transmitter to your phone. So instead of the money going into a screen or a display on the boat itself, you just connect an app from your phone or an iPad or an Android device now to the unit, and then you get the display on your screen. That has some pros and some cons. The pros are that it's cheaper by a fair margin because you're not paying for a screen, you've already got that on your phone. The downside is you don't quite have the waterproof element and the really good contrast in a sort of a high sunshine environment. Raymarine do make units that have those sorts of screens. They make them in a sort of, I think from a 4-inch up to a, 13 or something, so quite large. But you end up with the same transducer, as far as I know, the same sort of quality of image, but you're just providing your own screen. So in that sense I thought it was good value for money. It's also good, I think, for a commuter boat where maybe you don't want a lot of expensive equipment sitting in the boat. You want to keep something reasonably cheap, and then you take your phone with you, can't be stolen. The other advantage is the screen is wherever you want. You can sit at the back, have an iPad, you can sit at the front, wherever you go, you can connect to the Wi-Fi and you can see the display. You can also connect to multiple displays, a phone and iPad simultaneously, so that's kind of another advantage. In the box comes the Wi-Fi transmitter, so this is the main bit I need to sort of mount to the dash here somewhere. It's got the on-off power button, it's the main reason it needs to be on the dash, otherwise really it could be anywhere. This is the transducer that goes on the transom of the boat. It's got a hardwired lead into it, which goes into the back of the Wi-Fi transmitter and to power. It's a fixed length cable, obviously, and I've had a quick look and it's very touch and go whether I can kind of get this up to the bow of this boat. This boat's a 4.6 metre, so I'd say the dash itself's probably even a little bit over a metre from the front of the boat. So we'll see how we go. I'm sure we'll find some way of mounting it. Also included in the box is some stainless hardware for mounting it, and a bracket for the Wi-Fi transmitter and a bracket for the transducer. When I jumped into this boat, it rolled over to the port side, which is great because I'm going to be mounting the transducer on the starboard side, which means that starboard side's now higher up out of the water, so that's actually quite good for me. The reason we're mounting the transducer on the starboard side is because it's a clockwise turning prop on this outboard, and you want the water from the prop, the top of the prop, to be coming over the top. So if it's a clockwise prop, you mount the transducer on the starboard side of the boat. If it's a counterclockwise prop, you mount the transducer on the port side of the boat. You do, in these instructions, I'll get them out in a second, have a template for where you drill the holes for the transducer. I think with the boat laying on its port side, I'll be able to get to the starboard side above the waterline now and drill the holes for the transducer. So I'm just going to cut out the template they provide so we can drill those holes accurately. This is what the template looks like. So essentially what we've got here is the distance between the two holes and the bottom of the keel here, or the bottom of the transom really. So I'm going to find a 5mm drill bit for here, cut this across on the keel line, then we'll head down to the back of the boat and start drilling these 2 holes. The idea is you drill these 2 holes first because this part of the transducer is actually slotted. So you do a few trials, test the location, move it up and down. When you've got the right position, you drill a single hole here, which locks it in. It also says here, this document may not be to scale, so you know, before mounting, basically check the measurements. I'm not going to do that. I have a convenient layer of slime to stick that on with, which is good. I've got this bottom of transom or bottom of keel mark here, right on the bottom here. Then I've got this moved to the starboard side because we've got a clockwise prop. I don't want it too far out because we're getting too close to the surface of the water. I want it low down, but I don't want it behind the prop. So what I'm really looking at is having to the starboard side of the prop, not too shallow, and away from the wash of the prop. I'm also having it here where there's a smooth section of the hull so it doesn't get turbulence from under the boat affecting it as well. So this is where I'm going to drill those 2 holes. Something else that's really important to note with this template is that we want this bottom line parallel to the water line, not parallel to the slope of the keel. So I'm going to use the top of the template parallel to this anti-foul line here to make sure it's at the right angle. You do have the option to weld a bit of a bracket that comes out so you're not drilling through the hull. But to be honest with you, I don't have any huge problem drilling through a hull. This hull is built with rivets. Put a good bit of marine sealant on, do the fasteners up tight, it's not going to leak a drop. Because of the paper, the anti-foul, all that kind of thing, this drill bit was sitting really nicely. It wasn't moving around at all. But if you're having issues with like a gloss paint or something like that, I recommend either punching or drilling a pilot hole, that kind of thing. But that sat really nicely, so I'm happy with that. Now the reason I've done that first is because I do have a really limited cable. So I want to attach to the sounder and then make sure I can use every inch of that cable to get to the front of the boat. This is the bracket that goes on the transom, so you can see these 2 slotted holes. So once we go into those holes we've drilled, it gives us the option to lower or raise the transducer by a few millimeters and then lock it off with this round hole here. This little wedge bracket goes inside here and allows us to tilt the transducer up. And this part slides into the transducer so we can actually take it right out. I'm going to attach this bracket to the transom before attaching the mounting, just to give myself easy access to the holes here. I've wiped a bit of the slime off the anti-foul before mounting this, but I'm going to leave the anti-foul in place. To mount it, we're using these little 5mm posi drive bolts. Then we've got some lock nuts and some washers for the other side. As a sealant, I'm going to use this Sikaflex 291. It's sort of a marine sealant adhesive, really good stuff. All I'm going to do there is just squeeze a bit into the hole and a little bit around it. Just to cover it, I'll push the bolt through, it'll be fine. I'm not going to use a lot of Sikaflex here because bear in mind we're not looking to stick this mounting bracket to the transom because we're going to need to adjust it up and down as we do our testing. So just enough to seal the bolts. Now that I've pushed those bolts through, I'm just going to jump inside, put the washers on and tighten the bolts up. The bolts here on the inside coming through from the transducer are too long for my 8mm socket. So now I've got them run down, I'm going to use a spanner just to lock the nuts off and then tighten up with a screwdriver from the outside. As I get these tight, I'm looking to make sure that they're around about the centre of the slot so I can adjust either way and that the bracket has stayed level with the waterline. Now they're tightened up, I'm going to go and grab the bracket that the transducer actually slots onto and mount that. Before I start mounting this ratchet bracket and the transducer itself, I'm going to paint the bracket with this transducer paint. This is essentially a water-based anti-foul designed to not damage the plastic and to allow the signal to transmit from the transducer clearly. So it's essentially a special anti-foul for this job. Because this boat lives in the water, I definitely need this. If your boat came out every day, it's not something you'd need to do. The cable from the transducer actually goes in behind that ratchet bracket. So we need to slot this in first, put the bracket in here, put it all in, and then put the washers and bolt through. There's a little ratchet surface here and another little washer with a ratchet on one side. So this little ratchet washer's got 2 lugs on it, so it'll go into a slot on one side and then a ratchet on the other side. The ratchet surface is what mates with this part of the transducer mount. So I'm going to hold it against there and then put it in the slot as a unit. Like that. Then what I have is sort of a rubber compression washer, and then a stainless steel washer. So I've got the rubber compressor washer on the inside that goes into this little depression, the stainless washer on the outside, and then I'm going to put this little 5mm bolt through. On the other side is where the nylock goes, and it's a hexagonal shaped slot. So when I put that in, it's locked off, and then once everything's aligned, I can use an Allen key to start pulling it all together. To tighten this up now, I'm just using a 4mm Allen key. I haven't cranked this overly tight. It's interesting, it's just enough to let it sort of flip on its ratchets, but not so tight that I can't move it. So I'm presuming that's about right for this. Now what I'm going to do is just continue to paint the rest of the unit in this water-paste transducer antifoul. The next thing I'm going to do is run the cable from the transducer up to the front of the boat and get a sense of how far it reaches and what are my options for mounting the Wi-Fi transmitter. This has the cable that goes into the Wi-Fi transmitter, but it's also got a separate tail that has to go to the battery for power. I'm hoping I can reach about here on the boat, but I'm going to start by cable tying the cable to the existing wiring so it's neat and protected, and that way I'll have a true sense of how much slack I really do have, rather than having the cable take a shortcut and realise I can't really mount it here. So I'll go and cable tie it up and we'll see where we're really at with cable length. I'm a little bit torn about whether to put this cable inside the conduit that my power cables currently run through. I'm going to cable tie them to the outside for now because I'm a little bit worried that having a main power cable come beside it might interfere with the signal from the transducer. So I'll run it beside it. I can always put it in later if it turns out it's not going to be a problem. It doesn't look like I'm quite going to have enough length to reach the dash here, but what I'm going to look into is whether I can use the mounting bracket to sort of come just on the side here and come out of the dash. So I'll have a look what options it has for mounting and we'll see how that works. The way the mounting of this Wi-Fi unit works is we have this little ball joint type attachment that bolts onto the back of the transmitter. We also have this threaded section that's going to attach to another bracket that goes on the dash. So what I need to do is drop this ball joint through, so the ball joint section comes through where the thread is here. Then I put this unit against the transmitter until it locks in. There's some little teeth to make sure it's aligned properly. Drop the stainless bolt in, then I'm going to do this up with an Allen key. I'm going to snug that up. It's only plastic, I'm not going to try and break it, but I don't want it coming loose either. So just give it a little bit of nip, it's good to go. Now what happens is this threaded section joins with this mounting. So the ball joint should give it quite a bit of movement, and when I tighten this collar, it'll lock it in place. You'll also notice this is a bit of an angle. So what I'm going to do is angle this so that I can have it on my vertical dash rather than the horizontal deck I was planning to originally. That's about the best angle I can get from it. So it's a nice angle. As I said, it's not really a screen, so it doesn't really matter, but I think aesthetically that's not bad either. I'm going to drill the holes so it's mounted all the way outboard, just to give myself the maximum clearance here through the steering wheel, but I think that'll be pretty good. Next thing I want to do is just make sure that cable does reach, so I don't go to all the effort of mounting it and then have it not plug in. And there we go, that's plugged into the cable's routed where I want it to go. It just reaches, which in some ways is actually ideal, saves me dealing with any slack. So I'll mark those holes, we'll drill it, and then I'll start connecting the power up. For the screws provided, I've done a 3.5mm hole. I've got the bracket mounted now, and I know the cable reaches, so I'm going to pop this on just to keep it out of the way, if anything. But I'm not going to reconnect that cable until I finish hooking power up to it. I was aiming for having the unit mounted on the deck here, but because of the way the bracket's angled, it's really well suited to either a horizontal or a vertical surface. And I've got to say, this is actually probably the better option, so I'm not complaining. Now what I have is the plug that goes in the back of the unit to the transducer, and this tail that goes off to power. The power cable has a positive 12 volts, negative 12 volts ground, and an RF ground. And it says if your boat doesn't have an RF ground, then you can just put the RF ground to your battery ground, which is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to add a fuse holder to the positive wire, and to do that I'm using one of these little Nava blade fuse holders. It's sort of got quite a nice rubberized waterproof housing on it. So I'll just strip the wire on both ends, and I'm going to use a solder heat shrink combination to attach it to the positive wire of the whitefish unit. The type of connector I'm using, subscribers will have seen before. It's a low temperature solder with a bit of heat shrink and some adhesive. They're nice, quick, easy, pretty strong connectors, so that's what I'm going to go with. All I need to do now is just apply a little bit of heat to melt the solder and shrink down the tube. Now I've got the positive extended with the fuse holder. I'm going to pop a 5 amp fuse in here, blade fuse in here. The other advantage to having this fuse holder like this is it gives me the distance I need between my positive terminal block and my negative terminal block to have these two connect. I did a video a while ago on wiring the electrics in this boat. So those of you who saw that will remember those fuse blocks I have under the dash, but I'll go and plug these in now and I'll give you a quick look at that. Up under here I've got two main terminal blocks, a positive and a negative, which run to the battery, but they arrive via that 2-post terminal on the right. That 2-post terminal has a 20 amp fuse on it, bringing power to the positive here. Then I have that 5 amp fuse also protecting the whitefish unit. The next thing I'm going to do is install this ferrite block between the plug here and the filter here. This little tag's a bit in the way, so I might see if I can move that, and then I'll clip this block on. That tag slid down easily enough, and that's clipped on. So now I'm going to plug the yellow cable into the back, and we'll see if we've got power. So it looks like we've got a flashing Wi-Fi now. And if we hit power, power light comes on. So far so good. I'm just going to switch this off now and sit back and have a drink and wait for the tide to come in. Just while I wait for the tide, a few things worth noting is I am going to look at ways of just sort of securing this against the transom a little bit. It's cable tied up here now, so I'm not so worried about it over the next few days. But when I get this boat on a trailer back up to the workshop, I will be looking at ways of just making sure this can't get snagged on anything. In order to start using the unit, you need to connect your smartphone or your tablet or whatever to the unit's Wi-Fi. You get given a sort of SSID and a password for the unit, and that seems to work fine. I can connect. But once I connect, I start getting some errors. I'll show you what they look like. So this is the error I get, this lost connection. So it says trying to restore connection to the sounder. Now I've been getting this pretty consistently, but I went home and did a bit of research, and it turns out that there is an update for this whitefish, which I've downloaded. So I'm now going to try and install that and see if it fixes this error. I've jumped onto the Raymarine website and downloaded the update for this, and then put it onto a little SD card or a micro SD card I think it is, and expanded the file. It comes as a zip file, so you just expand it into sort of root directory of the card. Then I'm going to power the unit off, insert the card, power it back on. It should go through and do its update. Then we power it off, remove the card, power it back on, and that's the process anyway. We'll see how we go. On the back of the unit here, there's a little rubberized cover where the card slot is. Then I'm just going to pop this card in. When I first showed you this card, it was in an adapter here, so I'm just taking it out of the adapter for the slot that's here. Then I'll go around, we'll switch the unit back on and see what it does. So that looks good. That went from red to orange, which indicates the update's happening. And then when that finishes, I think this is supposed to go green again and the Wi-Fi will start flashing. And that's when we can turn it off and take the card out. Okay. So according to the instructions, that means the update's finished. It's now safe to turn it off. and we'll reboot it. Okay, card out, back on. Alright, let's try again without. We've got success now. I had a little bit of fiddling around after I did the update. I actually ended up rebooting the phone as well, and it seems to be fine now. Well, we finally had success, and I've got to say the image is pretty clear for a simple down imaging sonar. Obviously that software update was really needed, so I recommend you just do that as a matter of course when you first install the unit. I would say it's simply a case of the software having been developed for older smartphones, etc. So just keep the unit itself patched up to date if you're using more modern hardware, and you probably won't have the problem I had. I was hoping to sort of go through a bit more of the features of it, but I've run out of time because of the sort of problems I had. But having said that, I think it's also probably a good idea to become more familiar with the unit before I do that video anyway. There's a few finer points I haven't gone through due to running out of time, but there's a couple of cable ties supplied that go either side of the ferrite that gets installed on the cables. The other thing I need to do is put that third locking bolt through the transducer mount. The default position seems fine. I'm not having any issues with image quality, so I don't see any reason to move it up or down, so I'm kind of happy to lock it off there. But other than that, that's pretty much the complete install. The manual says that it draws a small amount of power when it's off, so I am considering installing a switch on that positive circuit rather than just having it fuse straight through to power. Either that or hooking it up to an ignition power, so that's probably something I'll look at in a future video as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great New Year's Eve, and I'll catch you next year. See ya. No, I won't. You won't see this until next year, so I'll see you this year.